So hi, welcome to another video, and today I'm going to show you how to swap the switches in your Starlight Finalmouse. So a lot of people have been saying the actuation is quite stiff for the Starlight, and that's one of the reasons why we're changing these switches to give it a much lighter actuation press. I don't know, the Omron 20s are a bit stiff in this. They're normally not too bad in most mice, but in this Finalmouse, they do seem a little bit stiff with the magnesium shell. So this Finalmouse is having all the dirty Omrons taken out of it. It's going to have the KL 8.0s dropped in it, along with a KL encoder, to give you that nicest click, as well as some KL micro side switches as well, which is slightly different to normal switches that you'll find in left and right mouse buttons. These KL 8s are a nice little switch. I've done a video on all the KLs comparing them. Now, if you're not familiar with my channel, this is going to give you the competitive edge over your rival gamers. It's going to give you the data and statistics in front of you to make a good decision on which gaming peripheral to use for yourself, or which switch to put in your mouse as well, if you want to get that picky on latency. Now, if you're not already, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so you've got this data before anybody else, to ensure you're the one who's going to be winning those games. So I'm going to speed through the teardown of this Starlight. There's a full video showing you each component on this, which I'll post in the description if you want to take a look at it, and you'll be able to then see how to take this apart. There's also a video for skate removal if you don't want to destroy these, because it's a little bit funny with LOD, and you want to make sure you're taking these skates off, make sure that you've got some replacements to do that as well. You see this base is sanded as well. It's because the base was slightly uneven on this one, so we leveled it out. And I was going to swap out the switches. Okay, then we're going to take out the Omron 20 million, which is a bit of a shame in this mouse. And it also uses Omron micro side switches, which are a little bit tricky and is seen in quite a lot of Logitech mice. So here's the switch you're going to put in it. Now for this, you're going to need a soldering iron. I use a desolder pump, and you're going to need some flux. I'll put all the tools in my description. There'll be a link there to all these if you want to get your own. And you're going to want to put a load of flux along the encoder, which is a bit tricky to get out. You're going to put some flux on all the switch joints you want to take out as well, just to help remove that solder and help the even spread, and also it helps some corrosion later on. Although I have done it quite a few times without this, I had no issues either. It can just be a little bit tricky to get out. You can use a desolder pump. I've got an electronic one. You can use a manual desolder pump, or you can use braid. Depends how you want to do that. These aren't too difficult to get out. They're not like a Zowie, which has got a really thick PCB and can be quite difficult. I'm using around 380C here to take this off. Could use a little bit less, 360, just up to you. I'd certainly start low if you're doing this, you're not used to soldering. So you don't burn the board, but I'd also, if you're not used to soldering, practice on something a lot cheaper, because these Starlights are pricey. I'm going to go through and take out all the solder on each of the joints. Then I'm going to move on to the encoder. This is my desolder pump. It does make life a little bit easier for me, especially when I'm doing so many switches. But if you're only doing one set yourself, I wouldn't bother getting one. You could probably use one of the ones that come in general solder kits, although they're not that good. I'd use braid, with my preference. Now I'm using a shovel head desolder tip here. This is really useful. Again, if you're not doing many, I wouldn't bother too much, but this does help take out these switches a lot quicker than with a smaller tip. You can see I'm switching between the switches. This is so to overheat them. Be careful of that. You will melt them, and that can cause you some problems. If they are being a little bit tricky, like that one on the left side, just make sure you move across a little bit. Don't overheat them. So patience here. Don't use too much heat in your soldering iron. Just keep working them, and eventually they will come out nice and easily, and you won't damage the PCB, because these are not easy to replace, these PCBs. In fact, you probably won't even get one. The side switches are a little bit more trickier to get out. We'll show you how to do that as well. And the encoder is one of the trickiest parts on this, so be careful. This is the easy bit at the moment. Omron does not want to leave, but finally we get it out. Goodbye. Now onto the encoder. There's some bigger legs on the outer edges that clip it into the PCB. If you're not sure where to get these encoders from, I'll put a link in the description to my shop. I have some of these. I can ship these out to you if you need one as well. I'm using a Kale Red encoder here. You don't necessarily need to use that. You can use an Alps encoder. Just depends on which one works for you in terms of what you like the field to be like. These modifications are actually for the Whale. So if you want to go check out his website, he's been doing a review on it. He's been using it for a little bit now, trying to get used to these switch changes. He'll give his impression on what he thinks the difference has been like changing out these Omrons to Kale 8s. You can see here the encoder just takes a little bit more work. Again, I use some tweezers for this. I'm just trying to free up one of the pins on the front, which kind of push against the PCB to hold it in place. I find I'll use some wire cutters now, and then I'm just going to pull out some little legs on the side of it, and then the encoder should come out. Sometimes it can be tricky. This is the best method I've found so far to do this. Just take your time with it. There's no rush. You don't damage the PCB again. I'll be dropping out a video for how to place these switches on a Superlight, as well as the side switches, which are notoriously bad for changing. So that'll be out very soon as well. I know a lot of you have been waiting for that. But there you go, encoders out nice and easily in one piece as well. It's good to see that. They can be a little bit tricky, but this one's come out nice and easy compared to many others. So you need a 9mm encoder. That's the one you're going to need. You can use any 9mm encoder. So I'm just using a Kale Red here. These are my preference. These are the ones I actually like. They provide a little bit more feedback, but they're not too loud. You have to push the outer pins in so they're like a spring loaded, and then the other three just drop in. They're in the center there, don't need to be flexed. So only the outer ones, and that then pushes back against the PCB. Then you're just going to need to resolder all this back up. I always put the encoder in first, and I also do the one leg just to make sure the encoder's straight, because sometimes it won't be straight, and you don't want an encoder on your PCB that isn't straight, and you don't want to go through all that pain of trying to take it out. So my tip to you is solder one of the pins, make sure it's straight. When you're happy with that, then go back and solder the rest. Much easier to do it that way than it is to go back and have to try and take it all back out again. You don't want to be doing that. Is this a risky mod? I'd say this is quite advanced because of the side switches and the encoder. So if you're not used to soldering, I wouldn't be doing this yourself. If you want me to do it, I've got to put a link in the description. I've got shop.beardybob.com. You can go there and send your mouse out to me like this one, and I'll mod it for you. No problem. These are also very expensive. You don't want to be messing up your Starlight. So now the encoder's in, we're going to put these Kale 8s in. Again, if you need some Kale 8s, I've got a shop. Sells all these switches, so I can ship some of these out to you to get your nice little click going, no probs. If you want to see this all done live on stream, which I do for many of them, especially on a Wednesday, that's my regular day, and I've been doing some more in the week. Just go to Twitch, Bearded Bob, and you can sit here and chat to me while I'm sitting modding many mice, different styles. I do quite a lot of different mice as well as modding them for weight reductions or switches. Just depends what's going on. For instance, tonight on stream looks like it's going to be the Rival 3. I end up doing some polls on Twitter and see what people want me to mod. They can get a view for their own modifications or just interested in seeing what that mouse is capable of when it's put under Butcher Bob's hands. See what we can achieve weight-wise or modifications in terms of switches and things. Now you'll notice I put a little bit of solder on the front pin hole, and that allows me to adjust the switch and just bring it through and then trap it so that I can test to see if it's straight or not. Some people recommend not doing this, but for me, I've had no issues. If you do put too much solder in there, the solder will go through to the other side of the PCB, and then you have to use braid to get it out. It's a little bit of a pain. So I use a very minimal amount just so I can hold the switch in place without having to solder the entire board. It's a lot easier that way for me. But personal preference. If you have a different way to do it, let us know in the comments. Again, just checking that they are nice and straight. If they're slightly wobbly, at least this one's slightly outplaced on the outer edge, you can then just readjust it because you've only done one pin. A lot easier. And then just get it nice and straight. And then once that's done, you can then complete the rest. Just be careful when clipping on the left-hand side. It's near an LED, so you don't want to damage it. But if you've got some quite, my crocodile clips are quite weak, but if you have some stronger ones, it could crush the LED. So again, just be careful placing these where you can. Not very easy placement on this Finalmouse PCB. It's optimized quite well. A bit awkward to try and get a grip because of the left-hand side on here. You can see there's a gap where these switches are. Now Finalmouse, I'm assuming they've used these smaller micro switches. I'm not particularly a fan of the feel, but I'm assuming they're using these because they want to make this the lightest possible. It's one of the tips a few mice companies are doing at the minute. They're putting lighter switches in them on the sides. I personally would have liked to see full-size switches, although I understand here what Finalmouse are trying to achieve with the lighter weight, and that's one of the compromises that they've made for you to get that weight down. This is what it looks like. All the KLs are in there, KL encoders in, so they're the main switches done. And the encoder, now we've got to do the side switches. Now it's a little bit tricky to try and grip these side switches. Unfortunately, they are not detachable because the ribbon cable is stuck to the PCB. So you're going to have to try and balance it or hold it at the same time. Like I said, this is quite difficult. I certainly wouldn't recommend this unless you're advanced in soldering. You mess this up, you're going to be crying. I'm not even sure you can even get a replacement ribbon cable. So you've got to be very, very careful here. The reason why we're changing these is the KLs offer a better feel, in my opinion. And they also have a better rate for not failing, these Omrons on the side. Although nothing like a Omron 50 million. I have seen some of these fail quite a lot in a Logitech mice. I think the risk is a lot lower, so unless you really want to change them, I wouldn't do it. Now I'm using a heat gun, slightly different here to desolder these pins. Gotta be careful, you can melt the actual switch as well, because you need to get the temperature up quite a lot for the solder. It's also not as direct as a soldering iron, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't damage the thin PCBs. And I've been learning this a lot on the super light G Pro wireless because they are very, very fragile. And so what I do here is I just lift it up bit by bit, very gently, heat up the solder, lift it a little bit, let go, let it cool down, heat up the other side, and eventually the switch will come off and it won't rip off the pads underneath, which are exceptionally delicate. So, like I said, be very careful. So there's the first one off. You can see the little pads. I'll have to solder another one back on. This switch is a little bit more tricky to find. There's a few other options. There's also TTC. There's some Hawanu ones. There's a few out there that you can switch into this if you like. Just depends on your personal preference. I'm looking to do a video on these side switches shortly. I just need to get my Omron main one out first, which you know I've been slacking on, so that you guys and girls and ladies and men can all decide which is your favorite actuation. So if you haven't already, if you're still here watching me do this, which is your favorite switch, put it in the comments. I'm always interested in seeing what people are enjoying. I know the Honeywell UX10C at the moment is very popular. A lot of people are pushing that to me. I actually do like that switch as well. I'm getting to the stage now where there's so many switches, it's very difficult to decide which ones you really want. So hence I'm doing these videos to try and help people get a bit of a better opinion. We're getting a bit more flux down on the PCB here, or a bit more flux down on the ribbon cable. And I also just tip a bit of solder on the legs of these switches. Just makes them a bit easier to solder. When you put them down, you can just then tap onto the leg at the edge, and then it just slips straight onto the pad. No messing around trying to get the solder or trying to hold the switch while trying to hold the iron. That is not easy work, and what I'm trying to show you here is some of my little tricks and tips to allow you to get away with soldering a bit easier without, finding these mistakes out yourself. So there's 2 little pins on the back of the switches, and you can feel they drop into this board. You can feel it, you can't really see it on this. It's a bit of a feel technique, and when you're pushing these solder down, just make sure they go in and it clips into the board, or it won't sit flush with the ribbon cable and this little adapter Finalmouse has made for the side buttons. So just be careful there. I wouldn't use any excessive heat on here. I'd use the minimal amount of heat you can use. So I've turned my iron down, my iron's about 360 now, just to make sure I don't melt the cable, and even at this temperature it still can do that, so you got to be very quick. So there's the switches in. These are now Kales. I think they're 5 million, but they're, for me, a bit of a nicer switch. Very subtle. The home runs are very similar in terms of press, but the Kales for me are just a slightly nicer switch. Now we're going to reassemble it. If you're not sure, I've done a video on how to center the scroll wheel. Some of these Finalmouse Starlights don't have a centered scroll wheel, and I've done a video on that to help that out as well. This mouse has had that modification as well to allow it to be nice and aligned. Depends how OCD you are, but for me, I think it's worth it as well. To put that together, this is what it's going to sound like now. I'll show you another video on how to remove any of the pre-travel on this mouse or other mice as well. I hope you like this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you soon. See you later. Bye bye.